self-doubt and authenticity kind of in like a cycle. Like
Okay.
if I'm feeling really authentic, that's great. But something might set me off and I might start feeling self-doubt. And then I start questioning my authenticity. And then I need to build my authenticity back up. And then I maybe have another, it kind of keeps going round and round.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of in that is also vulnerability. Like the only way to kind of get back to the positive is to be vulnerable and to persist through. And I think vulnerability and finding your authenticity are two of the most challenging elements of learning. Hi, I'm Elayna.
And I'm Marissa.
Thanks for joining us.
Let's dive into another exciting episode of Everything is Learning.
Hi, everyone. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Marissa, who's going to be joining us on the Everything is Learning podcast. Marissa happens to be my older sister, so if you hear me call her Mimi, that's her family nickname. Hi,
That's
Mimi.
me.
Welcome.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so pumped you're here. Let's talk about self-doubt and authenticity today.
Okay. I am really excited and eager to talk about self-doubt. In fact, I've had some moments of self-doubt recently. I mean, I'm proud to say that I've overcome them, but yeah, self-doubt has recently manifested itself in my life by overthinking things and trying to make the best decision, but the perfect decision. And I was stuck in the cycle of that. So this is really pertinent to my life, but I'm going to pass it over to you to hear what your thoughts on self-doubt and how authenticity plays a role are.
Yeah. I mean, when I first think about it, sometimes I go to present, but most of the time I go backwards when I think about it, just like where learning started for me, where I learned the lesson the first time or had experience with it. And I think for me, I guess like a core memory for me was thinking back on my boyfriend Bill, who I know you
Boyfriend
know.
Bill.
Yeah,
Do I know
Bill
Bill?
Shakespeare, Billy,
Oh, oh, got it.
my
Okay.
boyfriend Bill.
Yeah, okay.
My long love affair
Yes.
with William Shakespeare.
Yes.
Um,
Okay. That's so true.
and and yeah, so it started a long time ago. Actually, former students, I still have like gifts that they used to give me because this obsession is like not well hidden at all. Between
Yes.
what was hanging in my classroom or wearing socks or just quoting things or obsessively talking about 10 things I hate about you via Taming of the Shrew. Like I
Yeah, to
I
be
just
or
I
not to
love
be,
Shakespeare.
there was no not to be. It was always
Yeah,
meant to be.
meant to be. Oh my gosh, and I just realized the girl in the movie, she was obsessed with Bill Shakespeare too. Do
Yes.
you
She
remember
dressed
that? Oh my
up.
gosh.
Yes, she totally trusted that someone, William Shakespeare, was gonna show up at her prom. I hope
Like,
in any way, shape, or form to have that level of trust and belief.
yeah, that was like, I wasn't that nutso about it, but I definitely, well, I guess I'll get back on track. So
Yeah, but
for
it wasn't
me,
closeted either.
no, it definitely wasn't closeted, but I didn't have like the garb. So it didn't go too far, but I did have an obsession. But anyway, so for me, I feel like when I was a lot younger, I was told that I wasn't really a great reader or a great writer, but I felt like
Oh.
that was really wrong because I felt like I did love reading. I did love stories. I loved acting out stories. I loved writing stories. I loved, anything that had to do with writing. I mean, I remember I was in like second grade the first time I wrote like a love song and or like a rock ballad, and I
Yes.
just felt like I had the soul of an artist, like of a writer, and to be told at such a young age that I didn't, that academically I didn't, which was all that really counts when you're younger. Like I don't think a lot of times when you're told something like that, you continue to try to persevere and share because academia at that age is really like your job in a way.
Yeah.
Like going to
That's
school is like kind of, yeah,
that's
like
how
fills
you're
that
measured.
space.
For sure.
Right. Um, and so I just, I remember vividly hearing, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate." And then I also remembered, "To thine own self be true." And those two things, I
Mm,
didn't
yeah.
understand anything that Shakespeare was saying. I literally didn't, but I felt it. Like, I remember hearing somebody reading it, and I felt it. And, for me, I was like, gosh, there's something here that, like, I love about this. And it just made me persevere, and it made me really realize, like, even though people are telling me that I am not something, I know that I am. And so that self-doubt actually made me realize that was I found something that was authentic to me. And then I was starting to think about, like, okay, what inspires me in these situations with self-doubt and authenticity? And I
Oh,
started thinking about, like things that Shakespeare said. I just remember, like, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking that makes it so. And I remember telling learners about that. And I was like, really what that just means is, if I think it's bad, then it's bad. If I think it's good, then it's good. There is no good or bad. Like, it doesn't exist unless I think it does. So if I label it, then it's just going to make things either worse or it's going to make them better, but it can just be. And the other quote that I thought about was like, our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. And I think that idea that, again, if our thoughts are traitors, they make us betray ourselves, then we don't even attempt because we're so afraid. And
yeah,
then
it's like
that
a
led me to the next
manifestation.
thing. Yes, for sure. Like, you're manifesting your reality. And that's our brains are so powerful. Like, it is phenomenal. And I am obsessed about learning about this because I learn something new like all the time. And I love learning because I can continue to push myself. Now, absolutely, my mind convinces me to doubt myself. In situations where my authenticity is questioned, I start doubting myself and it manifests as frustration or anger or something like that. But
Sure.
in situations and around certain people, I feel like I could be my most authentic self. So, what are you thinking? Like, is there anybody who's inspired you along the way to think about self doubt or authenticity? What's your experience with self doubt and authenticity? I know you kind of alluded to it a little while ago.
Yeah, sure. So, well, as far as self-doubt and when thinking about this idea, self-doubt shows up in a lot of ways, and I absolutely think everyone has it. I think to varying degrees. I don't think there's like a, you would know if you had it or you didn't because you know what none of it feels like. And there's something to be said about people who are so confident in themselves. And when thinking about self-doubt, I Ted Lasso is a recent fan favorite show for me. Like The Office has always
Love.
been my go-to, but Ted
Yeah.
Lasso is right up there. Anyway, like I think about there's a question posed to a few people in the show about would you rather be a panda or a lion? And then Jamie Tart comes back with just rather be me. Like he's a character who probably doesn't have a ton of self-doubt in the same way, but like later in the show you do see it come out. At the same time, then I really love, so for me, self-doubt shows up as overthinking something or getting in a cycle of is this really the right choice, especially now. I'm a parent, you're a parent.
Mhm.
Sometimes our choices impact other people. When it was just me, it seemed a little bit more low stakes, but I still would
Right.
get caught in this constant cycle of wanting to make the perfect choice, the right choice, as if there was only one right choice. And it's not black and white like that. So self doubt shows up in those ways for me. And when I'm authentic to myself, it's a lot easier to make that choice. And so I found through experience and overcoming my self doubt curiosity really shows up big in my life. And so
Mm,
Ted Lasso talks about being curious, not judgmental. It's a quote by Walt Whitman, but like it really struck me hearing it when it was presented in Ted Lasso. And for me, how I am able to overcome, so be curious, not judgmental. It's a quote by Walt Whitman, but it really hit strong in Ted Lasso. That
yeah.
for me is how I overcome my self-doubt, is trying to remain curious. Especially to your point, when authenticity is questioned, then I have an emotional response. And
Yeah.
I think I'm driven by emotional responses when I cannot be my authentic self, because I switch from a rational person to an emotional person. But so
Mm,
given that your self-doubt and depends on your view and who's potentially inserting self-doubt in your life. So you had used previous learning mentors. As a learner,
right.
learning mentors were funneling and feeding your self-doubt. Depending on that view, self doubt can offer windows of self improvement and learning if you choose to see it as that opportunity. And it takes
Right.
an immense amount of vulnerability to be your authentic self, because you have to understand what's true for you. And what's true for you probably doesn't always feel good or isn't aligned with everyone around you. But that doesn't make it less important or valuable. So I definitely feel that um, when you consider self-doubt and you understand what how it show manifests in your own life and ways in which you can choose a path forward, it's not necessarily always overcoming it. It's maybe coping with it. Like, I can't overcome it in this moment. I need more information or I need some help, right? Being vulnerable, accepting help, or choosing a path forward that feels good and being vulnerable to that experience is really where it shows up for me. But I don't know, do you have any examples of that from your life, or where
Well,
ways you find it challenging for you?
I mean, everything you just explained, I think is so valuable. So I just want to like acknowledge the fact that you talked about vulnerability. And I think vulnerability when it comes to self-doubt and your authenticity and sitting with what makes you feel emotional or uncomfortable, like that is mind-blowing to me
So
because
Thanksgiving dinners for some people.
for sure. And like it's so funny because I just had the flashback to I think it was either Thanksgiving or Christmas in The Bear. Have you watched The Bear? I don't think we've talked
Oh,
about this.
no, I
It's
haven't seen
outstanding. But like as funny as it is to reference that, like it can be that stuff can be really really stressful.
Sure.
And I think part of what you're saying too, actually since you're bringing that up, I think what I was thinking about when you were talking was practice, like being in situations that will make you when you know you're going into something that makes you question your authenticity or someone in a situation may make you question that. It's almost like I kind of see self doubt and authenticity kind of in like a cycle. Like
Okay.
if I'm feeling really authentic, that's great. But something might set me off and I might start feeling self doubt. And then I start questioning my authenticity. And then I need to build my authenticity back up. And then I maybe have another, it kind of keeps going round and round.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of in that is also vulnerability. Like the only way to kind of get out to get back to the positive is to be vulnerable and to persist through. And I think vulnerability and finding your authenticity are two of the most challenging elements of learning.
I do want to point out one thing as we're talking, because I think it's really important. And I think you and I, as people who identify as women, can understand this. But I do think that this is really important to say.
Mm.
Vulnerability is not weakness. It is
Yes,
not weakness.
it
Being
is
vulnerable,
strength.
it is. And especially because it's risky. especially if you
Yeah.
don't know who you're around. It can be risky to be vulnerable. And I feel that it's widely accepted of me to be vulnerable as a female, where it may be challenging for people who don't identify in the same way. And so I
Right.
want to offer that that doesn't make it less important, but I want
Right.
to call out that there is not an equation where vulnerability equals weakness. It
Right.
is the antithesis of that. And so that is why
Yes.
I feel important. Like authenticity requires vulnerability because it requires strength. And strength
Yes.
is what's required to overcome self doubt. So it's super impactful what you were saying. I just need to make sure to call that out because I tend to see people think of weakness and vulnerability as synonymous, and that's entirely incorrect. I want to
Yes.
overtly state that. I think it's really important when you're overcoming self doubt because if you're seeing self doubt as a weakness, then you're never going to truly be authentic and you're never going to get out of that cycle that you were talking about. It's just going to be a slope, a downhill slope where
Yeah.
it can be a cycle if you're choosing it to see it that way. But please continue because I think what
No,
you're saying is super impactful.
I'm obsessed with what you just said though. Like my inner child was just like cheering you on. Like was hyped up and like ready to share a Taylor Swift friendship bracelet with you. Like,
Ha!
I just
Woo!
I,
Swifties unite!
but I and the fact that you talked about how we identify as women, yeah, I think that I think about that a lot as a boy mom. I mean, I'm a girl mom and a boy mom, but like I do think about that a lot. And you know, my partner and I are very intentional about um feelings and allowing our children to feel and talking about the feeling when they don't have the language. And I think that it really can start very young. And I think self-doubt can impact or make someone question their authenticity, like we've been saying. And I think being in inauthentic environments with inauthentic people has led me to feel crazy sometimes. And no matter how
Mm,
authentic I am, if I go into the wrong community or if I don't have the right people around me, I can start doubting myself. And just because I was talking about children, like I've seen self-doubt in authenticity at different developmental and life stages. And I, not just as a parent, but having been throughout my career and just kind of being friends with people of all different ages. And we're in a family where like our oldest cousin is almost 70, our oldest first cousin, you know, like we have like this crazy huge family. So we're around people of all ages and we have been basically since birth because we're the youngest. So
yes.
I think you know, children, where I see it with children is them not being able to do something. So like you're building blocks and then they fall. And all of a sudden you see a rise in frustration. And if you catch it in a certain time frame where you're like, "Oh man, that was so frustrating. But you know what? Let's try again. Better yet, think about this. You just haven't done it yet." Like the power of yet. Have you heard of the power of yet?
Well, not until you just said it, but yet like that's a amazing concept and so helpful for children. I mean, like I think of young Marissa and what I'm able to do as far as championing or overcoming self-doubt now, I couldn't do as a child. If anything,
Same, yeah.
I think I think children are way more authentic than adults because authenticity shows up
Yes.
in children as instinct. But I do think
Yes.
self-doubt also shows up a lot in children in a different way than adulthood. So, the frequency and the commonality of that, especially because children don't know in wanting to feel accepted, they frequently compare, and that can be really challenging when you're a child dealing with self-doubt is, "Oh, so and so can do this, and I can't do this." But what you just said about yet, I wish young Marissa had had that. The power of yet, oh my gosh, what I could have done with that. I mean, it's a good
Oh
thing I'm
man.
curious now, but please
Right.
continue.
No,
Tell me
I
more
just
about yet.
no, I the power of yeah, I don't know if it's a book or what it is, but I had a learning mentor who I've talked about before. One of my former, I'm going to use a term that I don't really believe in, boss, or leader.
Oh.
She was our leader, Missy, and she used to talk about the power of yet. And I was like, power of yet. No, not really. Like, that's ridiculous. And then I started using it in around learners. And I was like, you know
Okay.
what? That was awesome. I saw your effort. I saw what you were doing with that. I loved where you were going with it. I think that if we believe in our continuous improvement and we believe we can always be better readers, better writers, better learners, etc., like just keep working. We just haven't gotten there yet. And like I think the power of yet
That's
too,
so good.
especially with, yeah, well, I mean, like, and you're talking about young Marissa, but young Elayna was like, okay, I can't hit that high C note, like singing, or I haven't been able to play Ave Maria on a piano, or I haven't been able to do whatever yet. And the thing is the more practice you get with it, the less self-doubt you have, because you're practicing being in a situation where you can continue to get better. But I think to your point before about um when you get in that cycle of self-doubt, I've really realized, and I've been very inspired by learners younger than me, because I see them persisting through, but they don't have the language to say, I tried again. And I think
Mm,
that's the way through self doubt. I think authenticity and practice and going and pushing through. And I hate the word pushing because it makes it seem like you have to go through pain. At least that's how it resonates with me. But I think about teens and societal pressures and comparison, and like the fear of not meeting expectations or being constantly overwhelmed by work, and that
yeah.
manifesting in different ways. You made this great point about how things, you become emotional. I do think there's an emotional response to self doubt, because I think there's an emotional response to feeling inauthentic. And I think when that happens, for teens in particular, they withdraw, or they procrastinate, or
Definitely.
they're labeled differently. And I think that it makes the
Labeling and
process,
teens. Oh, yeah.
oh my God, it's so painful. And all that does is make the journey to self discovery, that process, it makes it so much longer, and it takes
Sure.
so much away. And that is so painful to watch and to have gone through. I mean,
You're right.
do
But
you resonate
also,
with any of this?
oh, for sure. But I also would say in moments of pain are also tend to be our biggest moments of growth. Like getting
Yes,
comfortable in the
unfortunately.
uncomfortable. But
Yeah.
I hear you on though the way in which you can craft that can be a lot different. But what you were saying about yet, the power of yet, there people struggle with intrinsic motivation. I that is
Mm,
as an adult not something I struggle with because if I don't get something done, then I won't have more time to do it later. So I have to do it when I have the time. But
right.
intrinsic motivation is something that's so hard to learn and come by. But the power of yet, the moment that you said that, like, okay, I can't hit this high C note yet, right? That inherently tricks your brain into saying, "Okay, but I have to keep working on it, and I will keep doing that." There's, like, built-in motivation. You just, like, cracked a
Mm.
code, like, I know not you, like, somebody smarter
Yeah,
than
no,
us.
I did not. Yes.
Yeah, some other learning mentor somewhere, but I'm really excited to be a learner in this moment because I did not know that till today, did not know that power of yet, and it's really gonna help me in my relationships with other people, particularly my children, because I don't want them to feel incapable, and the yet part is going to switch whatever self-doubt and incapacity to, just keep working and we'll get there.
Right.
But I think to your point about like teens and the labeling and the growth and the pain and all of that, like um, whether you're teenager or younger, I think modeling is a critical behavior and concept for young people that
Yes.
again, modeling, not comparing, but it
Right.
is all often how someone can foster a relationship and find people that they can be authentic with because someone who's modeling the behavior you want to emulate or doing the experience you want to do, right? Like, so If I wanted to learn how to play a guitar, I'm gonna learn from someone who I know plays a guitar really well. They're gonna model that
Right.
behavior for me so I can pick up on that concept. Versus if like I wouldn't hire a piano instructor to teach me how to play guitar. That doesn't mean they can't also play the guitar. So if I wanted to learn how to play the guitar, I'm going to hire an instructor who I know plays the guitar really well
Right.
because that's the behavior I want to learn. They're modeling that for me. I'm not going to hire a piano teacher to teach me to play guitar, not because they probably couldn't also play the guitar, but I don't know that they have that skill. So
Right.
modeling is a really critical element to overcoming self-doubt. Also the who is the a key piece in that, in finding the people that you can be authentic with and who are doing the things that you want to be doing or feel good to you. I think it's easier to think about others though than it is yourself. So I tend to think about a third person who has no vested interest in the matter. But as far as like, or even a good friend, right? If I would tell my best friend X, Y, and Z based on the situation, am I also willing to take that advice? Because a lot of times it's easier to give people clearer advice than it is to accept yourself because you can be your own
Yes.
worst critic.
Yes.
And so, I tend to think that most of the time I'm the exception to the rule, but most people have lived through the experiences that I've lived with. Maybe not in the exact same sequence, but, like, it's refreshing to know that I'm not the first person to experience this. Not
Yes.
saying that can't ever happen to people, but it's refreshing to know that I'm not the first person to ever experience this. Like, I was so scared to go through college, but hundreds of people I knew had done this before, but I had never
Right.
lived on my own before. I had never been out of state before. I had never done X, Y, and Z before. And I remember being like totally, how do I make a friend? Like I was panicking about things I had already done, but now I really had to think about them. I
Yeah.
think when going through that, I did say to myself, well, okay, if I'm I'm going to use you. If I'm Elayna and Elena's going to college, what would I tell her? And that was some of the things that I tried to start internalizing and like
I
take a
love that
deep breath
narrative.
and all of that.
Yeah.
But there are nuances to doubt, and it should be humbling for people to know that because you're not alone in this, and most of the time you won't have be the only person that's ever experienced this. If you're truly vulnerable with yourself and you're open to learning or finding learning mentors or people who are like you can be your authentic self around, a lot of times you don't have to go through the tough lessons because you can learn from others. And so that's where I find learning plays a role in self doubt, and learning plays a role in authenticity because you don't have to do it by yourself and you can take advantage of the lessons learned through other people. But
Right.
what have you seen as an adult, maybe, or with adult learners as opposed to children and teens?
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is just like I haven't really heard it that way before, but it makes so much sense. Like the modeling piece in particular and how important that is. And it kind of made me think about Montessori learning, which I know you and I really love
Oh,
to
yes.
institute and implement in our homes. Um, but the premise of that is like somebody, like a learning mentor, shows everyone how to do this skill, and then that's it. You get this one time, and then you get to observe as the learners practice the skills. So, for instance, you know, pouring beans into a pot, which seems silly, but it's a developmental skill. As like I was just thinking about my toddlers, like when they were younger, pouring is a skill that they needed, so doing it with beans is helpful to see what they would do with water before you get to water. So I was
Sure.
just thinking about, you model it one time and then their brains and themselves, like they get to try it, and you get to witness that, and you get to see how their brain works versus how you would approach it, and it becomes very
That's
personalized to them, like this is their
yeah.
approach. And I love that idea of modeling, because the other thing too is like not over modeling something, because if you do that,
No.
then it can turn into like a fixed mindset where you only feel like there's one way to do it. And I think that that's what I see a lot in adults is um a lot of these societal standards and pressures and ideas of success, like finding a life partner. If you don't find a life partner by X age, if you don't find a home and buy a home by X age, if you are
Oh,
not moving
yeah.
up the ladder, if you are not traveling, if you are not having babies at this time, like, and
Wow,
it makes me
yes.
think about that modeling where, like, somewhere along the lines, somebody instilled that these are milestones you have to hit, and if you
Mm,
don't hit them, you may as well doubt yourself and who you are and your authenticity and your whole life. And as silly and as overwhelming as that sounds, I've done that. I was like, I remember being in my early 20s and being like, I am not married and I am childless. Like, what have I done wrong?
oh,
And I
yeah.
put myself into these situations with people who did not make me feel authentic, who made me question myself. And like, I see that, we as sisters, we've talked about it with our younger sister too. Like, this is a conversation that people are having, and it's still happening even with so many people being out there. Like, I love Tracy Ellis
It's
Ross. Do you
true.
know who she is?
Oh, yes,
She's
I do.
she's phenomenal, and she is out there and she's like, "Do you know, like, godmothers, aunts, like, uncles, all these people have been mothering and nurturing people for centuries and not have children. Like, you can still
True.
be a parent in a way without actually physically giving birth." And,
Sure,
like,
well,
that
and you did that, you incorporated that in your own kids' lives with guide parents, which I think was such a cool concept. So, kudos to you, but yes, to Tracy Ellis Ross's point, dozens of people have done this before, and they don't have to
yeah,
go through the act of childbirth. Like, I
right.
mean,
For centuries, this has happened,
absolutely.
like, and I think that, like, concepts like that and people who have voices like that, like, I think of, and celebrities, it's just an example that I think more people would be able to, like, see or do or whatever. But, like, we were talking about Taylor Swift earlier, and people are constantly berating her for her music, and then they're berating her for her relationships. And it's the same thing with, like, other people too. It's not just her, but the fact that, like, she's dating too many people, or she's dating this kind of person or that kind of person. And when people comment on other people's lives like that, it sends a message to everyone else and to
Yes.
that person. And
Yeah.
I think that that's what I see a lot in adults is these pressures that make you doubt yourself. And again, it goes back to that cycle of, if you're doubting yourself, you might doubt your authenticity. If you're doubting your authenticity, you might have an emotional response. If you have an emotional response, the only way you can get out is, I think, to stop, to
Yeah.
reflect, to figure out.
Yeah,
And
cycle becomes spiral if you do it that way, for sure.
yes, I love that language. Cycle becomes spiral. That's amazing. Like, I just had this flashback to the last interview that I had, which was for the last, like, in-person non-remote job that I had, and I imagined, like, I imagined myself getting the job. Like, I tried to manifest it, right?
Heck
Because
yeah, good for you.
I I was so nervous and so excited, and I tried to over prepare to help me be less anxious, which led me to be
Okay.
more anxious. And I mean, you
'Cause you
know
wanna
how
hit
I
all
am.
those points, right? Yeah,
Right.
no,
And,
I
like,
get it.
I wanted to make sure I was prepared enough, but then I started doubting that I was. And then I pulled up and I just realized, like, if I don't bring myself to the table and they can't see that I love to do this, I'm either gonna, there's only two possibilities. I either get the job or I don't get the job. But the thing that's gonna make me feel worse is if I don't do good in this interview because I'm not myself.
I'm gonna
So,
challenge that. I think the thing that would've made you feel worse is if you didn't go for it all, and then where it was in a constant cycle of "What if? What if? What if?" Because
yes, no,
regret
true.
is really painful too. But I hear you on
Yes,
you wanna show up in your best way, and being authentic
right.
it wouldn't help them if you presented yourself in any other way than you, because then when you got in the
Right.
job, it wouldn't feel right, or they would expect something different from you, and then you'd be hating it all over again. But yes,
Right. But
I
and
definitely
like that's the
resonate with a lot of
thing.
what you said.
Well,
It's a huge
and
thing.
the only reason that I think you and I probably have gotten to that place, right, is because I mean, I haven't interviewed a ton, but I've interviewed enough, and our mom always like would practice with us, or we would practice with each other before an interview, and we would
Again,
talk through different things.
again.
Yeah, do
Oh,
it again,
sorry.
do it again. Say, make sure you're saying this, make sure you're saying that. Like, and that definitely caused self doubt in me because I wanted to make sure, like you said, hitting every point, make sure you hit every point. But self doubt, when it creeps in, I don't feel as authentic. And
Mm,
so I think that that's where like I've not done well in interviews, to your point. Like, and I realized it took a lot of resiliency to get to that place where now if I did apply for another job, I would go in and I would be very settled. I would be nervous still, but I would be I'm just very settled in myself now to know what I can bring to the table. And I want people to feel this way about themselves when they're younger. Now, please understand, yesterday, I was crying about this. Today, I'm feeling empowered by this. We go through cycles. Everything I think is a
sure,
cycle, everything comes back around one way or
sure.
another. But and I'm not preaching here, I'm just saying from my experience, I go from feeling empowered and feeling authentic and feeling encouraged and wanting to encourage others because I don't want anybody to feel the bad parts of self doubt. But I think I love a good reframe. And I think what you're inspiring me to see is self doubt can actually lead to great places, and
I agree.
resiliency can help us get there.
Absolutely. What the other thing I was going to say, to your point is, it isn't, it can't all be good, because if it was all good, then you would never you never
Yes.
experience bad to know what good is. But the other thing I would also frame, and I wish I knew this when I was younger, and I don't think you can stave off experience. You have to go through experiences to get to this place. But to your point earlier, where society has established certain benchmarks or milestones, I can remember very clearly feeling similarly on some of those points that you had mentioned. Because in interviews, people will ask, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years?" And that's always been like a bane to my existence, because I used to do this, like, it was an exercise. Even in school, they would have you map out, and I can remember thinking, like, Where did I expect to be by, let's go with 25 or 30, because those were 2 milestones in my life where I could actually go back and reflect, and I didn't hit a lot of those, and I felt less than because of that.
Right.
But then I also went back and looked at, because of a conversation that I maybe even had with you, but also with friends, I look at all the things that weren't on my list that I wound up doing, like moving to a different
Oh.
state and making a life there. That wasn't on my plan, but I did amazing things with that. I met my husband from that. And had I done exactly what I thought in the order I thought, I wouldn't have done that.
Right.
Traveling abroad, another thing that wasn't originally on a plan, and now Madrid, Spain is the best place, my favorite place on the globe, and I would have never gone had I did a one-to-one mapping of where I expected to be. So, I would
Mm.
caution anybody from establishing, here's like, staying on a clear and concise path. Great if you know it and you feel that that is you being your authentic self. But if you are in moments of self-doubt because you haven't matched up, don't think about what you didn't do, or think about what you didn't do yet, and or think about the things that aren't on that list that you did do that really were part of you being your authentic self. Because I think that is a really impactful journey too, and one that people forget to do.
I love that. I love everything you just said because um it made me think of it made me think of Friends, and it made me think of Ross yelling, "Pivot! Pivot!"
Pivot! That's right. Pivot!
I
Pivot! Oh my god,
think
moving
that
couches too. Pivot!
pivot.
Look at what they were able to do
I
or not.
I just I think of it's just that's I think you and I are able to navigate through really challenging situations because we're okay being vulnerable, but
Mm.
we are also excellent at pivoting.
Caveat.
And and I
That's
think
true.
we've learned yeah, like and I think we're willing to reflect. I think we're very willing to talk about things. And we also are not afraid to apologize to other people or ourselves. We like being accountable.
Mm.
We've that's a
Yes.
core value for us is accountability. And I think identifying our core values is also something that can help us go back to who we are authentically. I think our boundaries help us to do that. I think understanding our triggers help us to do that. But I think the big takeaway I'm getting from this that I'm hoping we can talk about next time is resiliency. I think that
Oh, sure.
resiliency is the key to a lot of this. So, thank you
Yeah.
so much for being here, and I'm so excited to talk more next time. Are you in?
Thanks. Yes, definitely. Me too. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you
Awesome.
having me.
All right.
Talk to you
I'll see you
soon.
next time. All right. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to Everything is Learning. We're so glad you joined us.
Be sure to subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.